Okay, this is where things I think are getting more interesting, as the comic book story continues with the kids moving through the maze. The book becomes a kind of what I call a gender bender or genre bender. In addition to being a comic book, it now becomes a poetry book, a book of poems, of humorous poems. But it's a book of humorous poems unlike any, I think, that's ever been created in a way. And this is a good time to compare it to a typical book of poems, which I like, and we're going to compare it to the Shel Silverstein's Light in the Attic. I have 3 books by Shel Silverstein, or I used to have. This is the only one I currently have. I don't know what happened to the other 2. But anyways, it's very similar in the artwork and poems. And I like the poems and I love the drawings. But it represents the typical way that humorous poems, illustrated humorous poetry books, the typical layouts for them, which is usually a poem per page, sometimes a poem per spread, and an illustration to that poem. There's 1 example and 2 example. This book is pretty old. I think 1980 is when it was published, so 40 years ago. Today, usually the books are in full color, so the artwork is more complex or sophisticated, but the layouts are pretty similar. Poem per page or per spread, and an illustration to it somewhere around. Well, if you compare this typical layout to mine, you realize how innovative what I've done is. There isn't just 1 or 2 poems per page, but a lot of them. I'm not even going to count. In this case, most of them are really short, but later on there'll be a little more longer poems. And in this case, most of the poems aren't illustrated, and they're also presented in a different way. Sometimes hand printed. Most of them are use font, which is a little more, makes them easier to read. But moving on.